So, Gordon, it's wonderful to talk to you again after 8 years. It's been since we last spoke, and both of our lives, I'm sure, have progressed. We hope in that time. But your career's focused on many areas, not least cities of the future, where I encountered you. So I did want to just start by asking you what you are now doing after our 8 years apart.
Well, great to be back and great to be able to reflect back on not just the 8 years, but I guess it's now 43 years since I landed in Silicon Valley. So that was early 1983. So we're coming up to 43 years. So my focus has always been on the complex systems that are managing and uh, guiding the physical assets of our lives. The things that utilities worry about, like gas, water, electric, transportation systems, and all the other systems, including, of course, digital systems that now help us manage and operate all of those. And so I've kept that as kind of a through line throughout. Came to Silicon Valley wanting to work with the technology innovators who were able, I hoped, to guide that because my father was an engineer and I grew up in an engineering, framework, both before leaving home to go to university and then while I was at Columbia University for undergraduate and graduate years. So I've kept that focus and I joined the Smithsonian Institution, which has 20 plus research centers around the world, to be the Future Cities person. My title is Global Fellow, and that's kept me very apprised of the latest innovators and the latest innovations that are being deployed in cities around the world. So that's always been my consistent focus, and I think now it's the end of year 6 for this for this role at the Smithsonian. Um, Many people know the museums, which have a lot of research centers and education centers inside them, but then there are other um, pure research organizations in the Smithsonian network of institutions. Um, so that's one thread. The second thread is I've been writing almost daily about what I'm seeing in the world of engineering, innovation, and how systems are being transformed, especially by digital technology evolution. So I've probably, in the last 8 years since you and I talked in this format, I've probably published 200 articles in magazines, some of them US based, some of them Canadian based, some of them European based, some of them Asian based. To give just one example, it was a couple of weeks ago. I published in a magazine called Global Asia, and the focus was on what's being done in the Mekong Delta to get ready for the big shift that's taking place because of climate change, which is going to affect the lives ultimately of 500 million people, certainly of 250 million who depend directly on the Mekong. Um, So sometimes I'm focused on Asia, and I've spent a lot of time there in the 8 years, some in Europe, where I've also spent a lot of time in the last 8 years. Um, but I've been looking at areas in the last 8 years that I hadn't spent as much time on as I could have or should have. For instance, mining and what mining companies are doing either in the cleanup of the damage or in the new exploration and production. So just today, Canadian Mining Journal published a piece I did about what I discovered in Chile and what they're trying to do in Chile. I think I've published maybe 15 articles in Canadian Mining Journal since the reality is that a lot of engineering innovation in the mining sector is coming out of Canadian companies. So that's kind of the second thread. So thread one was Smithsonian, is Smithsonian's. Thread 2 is looking around the world at emerging innovations, getting to know the innovators who are standing up those innovations, and then writing about it for various magazines. And they range from obscure magazines to, the Financial Times of London or The Economist or others. And then the third thread is working with private companies who are trying to make a change in the way they do things, but also the way their customers do things by bringing technology innovation. And some of those are US and some of them are European companies, some Canadian. One Canadian company that some of your folks may have heard of is called Risk Thinking, based in Toronto, where I got to know your current PM because Carney and I were both on the advisory board together. So anyway, it's a fascinating, situation we're in, where the technology is evolving rapidly. The business and government organizations are trying to keep up, and yet we're really not quite ready for the big shift that's taking place. We know intellectually that we need to get ready, and we know intellectually some of the things we need to do, but the political and economic systems are not quite there yet. And that lag is something that's keeping me up at night.
Yeah, I think to be in a position to observe on a broad scale the way that the world is changing at the moment, and to consider solutions to the challenges that raises, how we can take advantage of the opportunities it creates, I think is a wonderful place to be today as we move through this period of rapid change, which will probably never stop, but certainly to take the view of it that you've been able to take, and then provide advice to others based on that, I think is a wonderful thing to be able to do. We're going to talk about what you've seen, but the place I thought we would start, an area where you focused a lot of your attention, is of course on cities. And I thought I would ask what you see as being the main challenges that cities are facing today, and how technology is being used to address them. And I think as part of your response to that, the role of AI is something that we're doing a lot of thinking about at the moment. There's a range of perspective on it, but how you see that playing there too would be valuable to consider.
Good. That's a great question. Thank you for that. And I see the big challenges facing cities having some urgency because, of course, the climactic shift and the consequences of climate change are one part of the polycrisis, I guess you could call it, that is now afflicting cities. There's a fiscal and budget crisis, which was really accelerated or prompted by the pandemic. And some cities have not really been able to recover very well from that budget reality that they were hit over the head with when the ability to pay for services that they offered to their citizens and visitors, their ability rapidly declined, and that capacity has not fully recovered. So I'd say broadly, the biggest challenge that doesn't get addressed as much as it should is that the physical city, in which you have, decades of investment in roads and infrastructure of many kinds, that the cities own and operate in most cases, that digital innovation on coming and sitting on top of and integrating with the physical, that digital slash physical is something which has now created, big opportunities, but many cities are not really ready to manage that for themselves. They don't have the cyber security specialists on staff. They don't have the data analysts on staff. They don't have the digital engineers on staff. And it's hard for them in the public sector to recruit younger digital natives like you're teaching at the university, who have a natural inclination to start with digital rather than people your age and my age who weren't really trained to be digital first in their approach to everything. That it's harder to get the public sector to pay the the kinds of salaries that those young, talented digital engineers are wanting to be paid by the private sector. So the mismatch on the talent side of challenge and skill set in the city government is really now creating a gap. So the most innovative cities are trying to solve this gap by harnessing new technology like AI that can fill that void where they don't have the talent pool. They're also partnering with the private sector, particularly the tech companies, and not just the big names that we know, but lots of small and medium-sized companies whose names we don't know as well as the big ones, who are deploying AI-powered solutions in the utilities sector, in the transport sector, in the buildings sector. And that is really creating new opportunities for the private companies to provide services and to grow their business, but it's also filling the gaps where the cities don't have the talent pool. They can't hire those people at the rates that they want or need or expect. And so partnering is a natural solution to that. So one of the big challenges facing cities in the cyber physical realm is learning how to do partnerships really well, because it doesn't necessarily work simply because you want it to be so. It's a bit like human relationships. Just because you want a marriage to work well, because it's not just willpower that says I'm gonna will this into being as a successful marriage. You have to really have some skills and have to work at it and know and understand the best ways to have that relationship not just be functional, but successful and produce happy partners. And the same is true when private companies that have their shareholder mandate and their financial success mandate get married up with public agencies who have different stakeholders, namely voters and taxpayers, and different mandates that aren't necessarily the same as a for-profit company. So that's a big challenge, right? Learning and relearning how to work with others, and play successfully in the sandbox together, and sometimes inventing new things in the process, because you put 1 + 1, it doesn't always equal 2. Sometimes it equals 3, and you have to both look at it and realize, wow, we need to do some new things together differently than we might have otherwise done to manage these challenges for the city and solve these problems. I mean, just take the heat island effect, which we can talk about, or any of the other new challenges that are coming because of climactic shifts. So that's kind of my broad take on the big challenges that may not be as visible. We could talk about a lot of obvious challenges like the role of the citizen in solving, big complex problems like the carbon footprint of the city, which seems not to have an easy pathway to carbon reduction. Those are things that, we'll talk about maybe today and in the future, but AI specifically is going to be helpful as cities and companies partner together to not just monitor the activity of the city, which AI can be really good at because you're talking big data sets, but also manage that by responding to the conditions real time. That's where the cutting edge is in the future.
Okay, and we're going to explore some of this a little bit further. Before we do, uh, if you were to consider a city 10 years from now, we're seeing, partly reflected in your response there, significant changes as a result of technology, that are going to lead to specific changes, perhaps, in the nature of cities in the not too distant future. So I was interested to get your sense of what you think the main differences would be between the cities we see today and those we'll see in, say, 10 years.
Well, the hope, of course, is that cities are better sensed, better sensor equipped, and that the data that's streaming off of all those sensors, video sensors, chemical sensors, heat sensors, actuators of various kinds that can monitor systems and report on their conditions every 15 seconds, 15 minutes, 15 days, whatever the intervals are, that those um, sensing capabilities in the city, the hope is that they are producing outcomes that are beneficial to the population who's in the city at that time, because it's not an um, automatic result that just because you have more data, you have better outcomes. We know this from the history of the digital age. Social media has fantastic fantastic data sets. I mean, the largest, right? Just any given moment of any given day on TikTok with hundreds of millions of users around the world looking at their TikTok. Um, you know what people are interested in, what they're watching, how they're responding. Are they liking this? And does that indicate a mood shift about whatever that subject is of that moment? And so just because we have those big data sets doesn't necessarily produce better outcomes until and unless you can bridge the gap between the raw data and the desired outcome, namely in the city, either behavior change by humans or a response by machines that control systems that will, for instance, help decongest traffic where the condition has in that moment shown itself to be congested in that intersection, in that portion of the city, in that district. So what I'm saying, I guess, not very cogently or eloquently, is that one of the things that I'm hoping will happen in 10 years with the digital evolution of cities is that the space between lots of data accumulated, much of it showing conditions in real time of assets, bus fleets, private cars, traffic lights, bus shelters, roadways, bridges, tunnels, hundreds of different endpoints that you can monitor and measure, that all of that intelligence results in intelligent change in the way that we want to make the city better for the residents and the visitors. So to get practical, if you know that heat is rising in some part of the city, maybe the entire city, because of your heat sensors, you can respond as a city, maybe in real time, using AI, using automated systems to cool down, to reduce the heat rising and to mitigate the effects of heat on humans and animals. And that's something that we don't do yet. And I think looking down the road 10 years, a lot of the things that we want cities to do to be better, more livable, more sustainable, more prosperous, we could potentially decide we want to automate some of that with the help of smart beneficial AI. There is going to be smart not so beneficial AI, and we're going to have to struggle with how that AI gets used by whom, and hope nip it in the bud by getting, as much of that under control as we can. Most national governments are doing a really bad job at trying to get their arms around how to prevent AI from being a negative impact on the city or the city residents or the city visitors. So my take is that 10 years from now, the best possible outcomes that we can hope for in a city is not to prevent AI from making its impact. That's going to be hard, but to try to shift the curve from negative impacts of AI, which we could talk about that are going to manifest and already manifesting in the city, to positive impacts in the city. And that's going to require a lot of human intervention between now and 10 years from now. But the hope is that the human intervention will result in beneficial AI, that's urban beneficial AI, that does things like help with the environmental impacts of climate change, which, if you don't get your arms around water use in the city or heat in the city or pollutants in the urban airshed, um, you're going to start really seeing health effects that are going to pile up and that become really expensive in a city because public health systems won't be able to cope. We're already seeing the health effects of climate change in the global south, equatorial zone, and even beyond the equatorial zone, where there's large city populations that are not doing a very good job moderating and changing their behavior to help support the shift away from the most negative climate scenarios for those cities. So, if we want our cities in the global north to be better equipped to handle the effects of climate change, um, we're going to have to start really thinking about this 10-year time horizon. What is the preferred future? What's our transition strategy from here to there to get to that preferred future so that it's not the probable future, which is definitely not the scenario that we want. We want the preferred future. That's the positive, human-centered, sustainable scenario, which is going to require some pretty sophisticated engineering intervention now that we're not really there yet. There's talk about it, but most cities have not chosen that path yet, and that's the clock is ticking.
So what you seem to me to be saying is that the technology now that we have available now, some of which is already in place, is providing us with information, data around many of the things that we consider to be challenges, but that the challenge that we face now is the ability to turn that into action and to do something about these huge challenges that we face. And that seems to me to be a great thing to tell engineers that if they want to contribute to creating a better world, that this question is a very, very important one. And I'm sure you will also know that this is a problem not just for cities, but for organizations pretty much of all types in terms of taking advantage of the technologies that are available today. It's not just a question of knowing what to do, it's a question of being able to do it. And it reflects the words of someone who once wrote, philosophers have understood the world, the point is to change it, which was written many years ago. And that remains the case, is what you seem to be saying in your response. Okay, that does also lead in, I think I can create a segue to our next question, which is the role technology is going to have an increasing role in people's lives. And you have highlighted the importance of being able to actually make the changes. But this does then raise the question of governance. And so the technology might tell us about all sorts of things that are going to be good and important to do. But the relationship with citizens is a unique aspect that cities have and governments have. To some degree, or other organizations have it with their various stakeholders. But that relationship and that engagement of citizens uh, presumably remains important. Some have argued that it doesn't, that we can just let the technology determine everything. I don't think that would be a good thing. And so, how do you see the relationship between between democracy and what you've just described?
Well, it's the missing link in thinking within the Silicon Valley boardrooms where I spend a lot of my time here because it's where I'm sitting right now and where I've been since 1983. And working at places like Apple and IBM and Lockheed and Bechtel and Cisco, I've learned that the governance piece doesn't come up naturally. It's almost like it has to be forced on the conversation. So we talked a little bit in the last segment about the lack of government capacity to really help guide the AI evolution in a way that's going to result in the best possible outcomes. And I'm keeping my fingers crossed that we won't miss the window of opportunity before AI essentially closes that window for us and says, you had your chance to help guide this and govern this with humans. And now, we're intelligent enough to do this ourselves. Thank you. And HAL 9000, which, if people didn't know, was written by Arthur C. Clarke as HAL because it was IBM. Um, he was essentially saying, look, we have our own technology racing ahead of humans. And he was imagining one of those consequences, which is that HAL decides that the astronaut that Keir Dullea played wasn't really needed anymore and decided to, eject him from the spaceship. So I think about governance of advanced technology and AGI and where we're going a lot. And I think local governance is crucial insofar as local government can say, within our realm that we can control, within our span of control, these are the things that we're going to do. And these are the things that we're not going to do. And these are the things that we'll allow. And these are the things that we won't allow. But the problem, of course, is that AI is bigger than any one municipal jurisdiction. And even if you said in Palo Alto or in Menlo Park, where you have, or Cupertino, where you have, 5 of the largest and most important technology companies in the world, the city council is not going to have an impact on what takes place within Meta, Facebook Labs, for instance. So it's going to have to be national and global. And it means getting engaged citizens to demand that the technology be in service to humanity and show specific ways and places and cases where that becomes critical and use that capacity in democratic societies to wield the influence that citizens have, not just because we are the taxpayers, not just because we are the voters, but the whole system is in a democracy designed to be responsive, at least during the election cycles and maybe even between the election cycles. So our system in the US is being tested right now. Can citizen engagement have an impact? Because we have a dysfunctional legislature and we have a somewhat cowed judicial system. and a rising power in the executive branch. So the balance that we wanted in a tripartite system isn't happening here in the US as well as it should or could, as the framers of the Constitution had wanted or hoped, which means citizens have to engage at that much of a higher level to make demands about why technology needs to be used to solve these problems and not be used in this other way. Our track record with social media is pretty bad. Looking at the legislative and legal initiatives that have been put forward in the US and in Europe and in Canada, we don't really have much control over the social media. And a lot of AI is now running social media. What TikTok serves is AI driven. When it knows that you're interested in, you know, the latest celebrity romance or the latest stupid pet trick or the latest fashion craze in sneakers, it knows that maybe because it's reading your text messages, maybe because it's listening to your phone calls, or even when you're not on the phone and the phone is sitting quiet in your pocket, it's listening to what your conversation is over lunch with a buddy, or it's looking at how you liked stuff on Twitter, and TikTok is essentially taking all of that information in and in a microsecond, uh, able to adjust accordingly what it serves on your feed. So we haven't done a good job with that really high impact application of AI. Now we're going to have to think about what lessons do we learn from that and elect people who are going to be taking action based on what citizens want or need. And it's not going to be the majority of citizens who want or need AI to serve for these larger, higher common good purposes, but we can elect people who are going to fight the good fight and make sure that that voice is represented in the hallways of Parliament or in the judicial chambers or in the office of the minister here or the elected representative at the local level there. So I see governance as being the critical missing ingredient right now. We have all the other pieces. We have a lot of money deployed. We have a lot of talent deployed. We have a lot of technology that's already evolved and ready to be deployed. All of that's coming together rapidly. And the engaged citizens who can have their voice get heard about wanting, for instance, to protect children from the adverse effects of AI driving kids down a rabbit hole, resulting in bad social interactions or social anxiety or worse. And we've seen worse show up, kids committing suicide because of what they think is being said about them or what they see is being said and fed to their classmates. So I worry about that every day. And hopefully engineers are keeping this in mind as they comprehend what their role is in society and what skills they're going to bring. Doesn't mean they have to study social engineering, but it means they have to be aware citizens who are bringing their engineering skills to the task of making the common good stronger and making the outcomes better, because the technology is being built by us for us and should have the consequence of making a better life possible. Otherwise, why do we bother?
I thought I would take the question of governance a little bit further to focus specifically on data collection. Part of the reason that I wanted to do this is that we did have the Waterfront Toronto project with Google, which started with a lot of optimism and then fell perhaps on many questions, but particularly on the question of data and control of the data that would be in this, tech-focused community that would be a model for future use of technology in cities. Would have been wonderful if we could have done something with that in Toronto. And sadly, parties could not agree. The municipality, the province, and others could not agree with Google over what would happen or what how the issues around data would be resolved. Have you got any thoughts on this particular part of the relationship between technology and democracy?
Yeah, it's a great example for us to dwell on, not just because it's in your backyard.
Mm.
Um, and Google down the street here, I can see their what's called Googleplex, which is their headquarters. I got to know the people there in Sidewalk and got to know their approach, which was very arrogant, which said, we're the smart guys, we're the guys with the money, we have the technology, we have the financial resources, we have an agreement from Waterfront Toronto, and we're going to plow ahead and produce the, what was it, 900-page initial plan that showed all of the many ways that they were going to govern technology and govern the city processes in that district of the city. And they went through some motions, to have open forums, but they really didn't listen very carefully. They didn't hear and understand that there was a lot of nervousness about how people were going to be surveilled and their behavior was going to be monitored and tracked and measured, and then how the city would respond, the systems would react to the public behavior. And from Google Alphabet Sidewalk point of view, that was the beautiful thing, is that when you with your footsteps decide that you're going to spend more time on this street than that street, we're going to deliver more services to that street and not this street, because that's where you're telling us. So they thought that this was the ultimate form of democracy. We're going to follow your preferences, your behaviors, and your choices, and we're going to serve you better ads and better services and better conditions. It's going to be cooler in those buildings when you arrive during the heat wave, because more of you are actually in that portion of the city. And we're going to send an alert to your phone saying, if you want to get out of the heat and you want to come indoors, we've set up a special place at this intersection in this building, because we see more of you are in this neighborhood right now than in any other neighborhood. And we can't do it in every neighborhood. The cooling station is going to be here, but that's where 70% of you are. And we're going to respond to this heat wave dynamically and, in their view, democracy driven, because the greatest good for the greatest number is going to deliver the best outcome. And they didn't realize that, democracy is more than just figure out where the largest number of X is and then deliver more and better to X. It is a much more subtle, complex, reality that people want to have input on an ongoing basis, and not just at the beginning when a business plan and a city plan is being designed and presented to the council. So I think there was a lot of mismatch between their assumptions in the sidewalk world and the hopes and dreams of people in Toronto, either who were elected and appointed or who were just taxpayers. I say just taxpayers because, they're footing the bill to subsidize the arrival of a tech giant who was, being given not carte blanche, but the frame of the agreement was a pretty wide open, tell us what you want to do and let's go do it. And people bristled at that. And they didn't like the fact that um, the delegation of authority about big, complex choices was being put in the hands of engineers, many of whom had not spent much time in Toronto at all, and who didn't have a stake in the future, except the financial stake of the success of the sidewalk experiment at the waterfront. So, I mean, the dream was very enticing. The mismatch between the details of how you would run those systems and govern those systems, and that was the engineer's dream, and the citizens who really didn't know that that future was the future that they wanted. They needed to be educated about what that future really involved. And the team out of Mountain View here in Silicon Valley, you know, they just basically assumed that they could put forward their vision and that would be enough. And the deputy mayor of New York, who was running, well, the former deputy mayor of New York, who was running that, um, you know, I don't think he really ever grasped. He's moved on, you know, now he's doing other things with his life, but uh, you know, I don't think he and his team ever really fully grasped how much of a mismatch it was between their vision and plans and the reality on the ground. And that's, you know, sobering for engineers that when you're being given an exciting opportunity to potentially change the world, you have to ask not just who benefits, but who might be left out or thinks that they might be left out that needs to be included, because inclusion, you know, has to be one of the things that guides what we do with technology, AI and non-AI. If it's not inclusive, if it's not going to make an extra effort to widen the circle, um, you know, maybe it's doomed.
This question and this failure particularly, but also many others that we've seen, raises a fascinating question about technological change and stakeholder management. I mean, just one way of looking at this, and I think it's maybe oversimplifying, is to simply say this was incredibly bad stakeholder management. You had this huge opportunity and you failed to see the things that you've described. But at the same time, this is amazingly common, particularly from engineers. And as I teach them and talk to them about technological change in many ways, I emphasize this, and what I tell them is something that I've observed, which is that this happens most of the time. And you know, the message is fairly straightforward one: stakeholder management, engagement with those impacted and benefiting from, not benefiting from the change that you're making. Uh, you've got to talk to them and you've got to understand what's happening. And this is something that is still done so badly. It's fascinating to me that this continues. If your objective is a successful introduction of the technological change that you want, uh, you have to do this. You know, this is something that all engineers should do. Anyway, enough.
And I would say this blind spot,
Mhm,
which may be something that's afflicting the whole engineering industry,
mhm, mhm.
um, you know, is, how would I say it? It's an opening, it's an opportunity to really advance the whole industry and the whole science, because if we do recognize the blind spot and then try to fill in where the blind spot would otherwise blind us, to make visible the things that haven't been visible to us as engineers, you know, we're going to be a lot better as an industry to do the things that humanity is wanting, whether it's in the water crisis or in the climate shift or in the any number of other areas where we want, you know, our infrastructure systems to be better adapted for heat, or any of the other ways that we want to re-engineer our fundamental systems so that humanity can prosper and survive into the 22nd century. Um, you know, it's still a question mark about whether we will be there when the 22nd century dawns. You know, I mean, humanity may make so much of a mess of our, you know, of our nest that as a species, you know, we don't make it.
Well, and we should move on to the next question. But I mean, there is an alternative to engagement, which of course would be an authoritarian dictatorship approach to things. And,
It hasn't worked out
we're
too well
seeing
for the
too
Russians.
many, sorry?
It hasn't worked out too well yet for the Russians.
No, no, it hasn't. But that debate between democracy and authoritarianism is one that is very much alive in the world today. And I'm not certain that the authoritarian approach is likely to be successful for long, and certainly won't be good for most people. But at the same time, there is an alternative there at the moment, and I think that makes it even more important that that we work out how to do this.
Well, and look, as the technology becomes much more hyper automated, the potential for authoritarianism rises
Hmm.
because you're centralizing control in a group of engineers and programmers who will decide on behalf of everybody, which is essentially the authoritarian impulse. We need to act. This situation is a mess. We need the strong hand. Let's automate the process of whether or not people can do X. And that's, the hunger for the strong father who has the strong hand, who takes the tiller on the sailboat as the storm is approaching and says, we're not going to have a debate about this. We're veering left, or we're veering right, or we're veering away from the storm, and here's how we're going to do it. And I'm doing it and I'm not discussing it. And I have the technological capacity to steer behavior and systems this way rather than that way. So we happen to be at a really, important moment in the history of that struggle between democratization and authoritarianism, where the technology enables both, but it's harder on the democratic side because it's more decentralized.
Mhm.
Centralization, as we know in engineered systems, a single point of control is an easier management solution to an engineering problem. Now, the internet is a manifestation of how you can make highly decentralized systems that have no center work really super successfully and create trillions of dollars of wealth and new intelligence and new capacity. So we do have counter stories here. And I think, as engineers, we need to look at the successes like the way that the internet was designed and has prospered for 50 years.
Yes. Now, I'm going to move on to my next question, though we could talk about this for a long time. Uh, it's the question of security. You've done work in this area. It is, of course, an important one. Every day we're seeing examples of where there are challenges related to security. Can you talk about that? What are the main areas of concern here, and how should we address them?
The biggest problems are in critical infrastructure. So the engineered systems that we take for granted, electric, gas, water, sewage, some transport systems, those critical infrastructure systems are highly digital now, and they're highly vulnerable. So I was on the board of a company that was funded by a Canadian venture capital firm called Enertech. Wally Hunter and his team, who are very closely aligned with Waterloo. Um, I think their offices are right in that area around the university. So Enertech invested in a company called IP Keys, and I sat on the very small board that governed and helped manage. It was a very active board helping to grow the company. And ultimately it got sold to Parsons Corporation, which is a big US based 80-year-old very successful engineering company that was founded in Southern California, now headquartered outside Washington, D.C. in Northern Virginia. And they are now deploying this technology that IP Keys developed for electric and gas utilities to BC Hydro and I think about 500 or 600 utilities are now using this technology to try to secure their systems, because so much of our lives and our well-being and our safety depends on these critical infrastructure assets being protected from cyber attack. So that's by far the highest priority. Yes, banking systems and education organizations and healthcare institutions and government agencies all have to, as everybody must, protect themselves better than they are, because ransomware attacks are not declining, they're rising. And the theft of data is rising. And the state actors like North Korea, Iran, China, Russia, who are interested in stealing the data or interested in stealing cryptocurrency to fund their illicit operations, which the North Koreans have done very successfully. The estimates are that maybe $8 billion to $10 billion worth of crypto that they've stolen out of wallets and exchanges has been used to purchase arms, which are now being shipped to Russia for use in Ukraine. So, a lot of systems are highly vulnerable, and this is another blind spot. One of the blind spots has been, how do we ensure that the systems that we deploy are responsive to human needs first and foremost? And a related blind spot is, how do we ensure that when we design systems that we're thinking about human behavior, namely bad actors with malicious intent perpetrating criminal acts in places that are vulnerable, because we weren't thinking about the vulnerabilities, because we weren't thinking when we designed the systems about nefarious actors. We were thinking about the good things that we wanted to do with our, electrical engineering and our programming and our, digitization of transmission and distribution of electrons. So I think that cyber is probably, if I had a 5-alarm fire, I would be lighting a 5-alarm fire under all the critical infrastructure owners and operators and their big customers who depend on the electrons flowing and the gas flowing through the pipeline and the water flowing to their factory or to their apartment building. I would put a 5-alarm fire underneath those people, saying, if you're not demanding that your service provider, your utility, uh, do the things they need to do, and you can't do this by yourself, you need to get active and get engaged in the political system to force the regulators to force the operators of those infrastructure systems to do the right thing. And in the US, we have some critical infrastructure protection regulations, which that IPKeys company was building systems that would help ensure that the infrastructure owners were compliant. Because I think if you're violating the NERC CIP protocol, which the federal government of the United States mandates utilities have to comply with, NERC is National Energy Reliability Council, and CIP is Critical Infrastructure Protection. And NERC CIP compliance, if you're out of compliance, you can get $1 million fine every day you're out of compliance. So a lot of utilities, that was like a 5-alarm fire. If you have to write $1 million check every day that you're out of compliance, you're really going to focus on finding software that solves that problem. And that's what IPKeys did. And that's what the Canadian-based venture capital firm funded them to do. And that's what Parsons acquired when they acquired IPKeys. It was a very successful build up by IPKeys, and then a very successful acquisition, I think 2 years ago this month, by Parsons. And I would encourage people to learn about that, because it's a good illustration of where the federal regulation in the United States succeeded in forcing attention by the owners, the utilities of those systems that were vulnerable. And then the private company, IPKeys, responded. And now Parsons can roll that out to thousands of other end users who may not have the NERC CIP compliance requirement, because it only governs certain types of electrical utilities, but gas utilities, water utilities, sewage utilities all have vulnerable systems. and the IP keys technology is going to have relevancy for them.
And so, at risk of stating the obvious, just to make it explicit, uh, the reason that they don't do this without the regulation is that there isn't an immediate financial return. And
And they haven't had the cyber attack that cost them $1 million a day. And so it's like, what's my priority? My priority is maximize shareholder return.
Mhm.
And if I go to my shareholders or my executive office and I say I need to spend, $20,000 a month on this software to prevent the $1 million a day cost of the attack, which we may never recover fully from, they'll say, look, I don't see a 5-alarm fire. Focus on the things that we need to get better at. Make your delivery of services more efficient.
Mhm.
And
Yep.
that's a human thing. What's my priority? My priority is the thing that my boss and my boss's boss says are the priority. And the instinct is I get my bonus based on how efficient our system is, not whether we're preventing a future problem that hasn't happened yet.
Yep.
The incentives are skewed.
Well, and we're seeing the results of this. We've seen the attacks, we've seen the outages. We know it's going to happen. Okay, energy and the environment and the challenges that they pose for cities. You've talked a little bit about that already, but you've done a lot of work in this area. And so I thought I would just ask you to talk a little bit further about the challenges they face and how technology can help with it.
Cities, to be livable, to be attractive to investors who want to grow jobs in that city or want to help improve the housing stock or infrastructure with their investment. Cities to be more attractive to visitors, to new residents, to existing residents to stay and retain them, have to address this complex package of energy and environment. A lot of cities have really embraced the renewables revolution, and they've mandated benefits to those who bring renewables to the city. They've mandated benefits to those who are choosing to consume renewable electrons. Um, and of course, the problem is that we've invested 100 years in infrastructure, gas pipelines, transmission lines, substations, transformers, power generation stations. I mean, all those assets in our complex energy infrastructure can't be modernized overnight or replaced overnight. That's a multi-trillion-dollar problem for North America. How do you take existing grid infrastructure designed for old ways of doing things, like highly centralized power, peaker plants, etc.? How do you transform your grid and modernize your grid without breaking the bank? So I think of the engineering problem as bigger than the physical engineering problem. There's also the financial engineering problem. And, you could argue that some of the problems that Europe had, like Spain, recently with their power outages resulting from the way that the solar system interacted with their grid, is a wake-up call for us who want more renewables, not just decentralized renewables that serve a microgrid, but renewables like big wind farms that serve the megagrid and that can feed clean electrons. Now, I think we've had 80 days of consistent, nonstop, renewable only in California, which came about 5 years earlier than expected. So we're kind of celebrating a little bit the fact that the systems that we instituted, the regulatory systems, the financial incentive systems, the political governance systems around how power gets produced, transmitted, distributed, and consumed in California has resulted in us being able to shift entirely to renewables many, many years before anybody expected that would happen. So we're not an island, of course. California is connected to the Western grid. And so sometimes we're even rolling power to our neighbors in Oregon and Nevada. But you know, we're a pretty good illustration. San Francisco has made like long-term 20 years of investment. Our governor Newsom was mayor here. 2010 to 2016, I think, were his years. And I worked with him on a project called Connected Urban Development, where we, at his, really is his suggestion, put together San Francisco, Amsterdam, and Seoul, right? So the three major centers of gravity in the global system, North America, Europe, Asia. And we got the three mayors to work together on joint projects, a lot of which focused on energy and environment. And that lasted from 2010 to 2015. We put millions of dollars at Cisco, where I was headquartered. The headquarters team put millions of dollars into this project, which we ran and we helped design, and which the three mayors endorsed and supported because their departments essentially became the customers for this program. And we did smart mobility, smart energy, smart environment. And what we've discovered, which is still true, it wasn't just during the period from 2010 to 2015, is that you have to have an all-in approach because these systems are all overlapping with each other. The transport system uses energy. The transport system emits pollutants into the environment, just to take, one small part of the interconnectedness of the infrastructure systems that are multi-layered, multi-dimensional, and multi-dependent on each other. And so that was one reason why we wanted three cities, because we figured not only would they learn from each other in different continents with different ways of doing things, they were all democratic societies, they were all open societies, they were all forward-thinking mayors. We didn't pick them haphazardly. We wanted to pick cities that had some things in common with each other, but where they differed was how they did the overlap problem or how they addressed the overlap problem. And maybe I'll conclude today by saying, your students need to think about their realm of engineering. They're fascinated by that. They study that. They master that. But the success of any project in that realm, energy engineering, environmental engineering, water engineering, transport engineering, the success in that realm depends on their ability to draw on lessons and assets and solutions and systems and engineers in adjacent realms. Because the transport engineer that's not talking to the energy engineer or the environmental engineer is really like addressing the problem with one eye patched up and one hand behind their back. And you can't do what we have to do with limited capacity. You have to have maximum capacity, which means partnering up with other disciplines in the engineering realm, and maybe even in the non-engineering realm, like bankers, who I call financial engineers. They don't like that term, but that's another realm of engineering.
Indeed. Okay, last question was around how people should prepare for life in the cities of the future. Perhaps you've hinted at some of that with your reference to collaboration just now. But basically, what advice would you give to the students who are graduating tomorrow about preparing for the lives they will have?
I think, I could say a lot, but the one thing I'll say, and it's not flippant, is read and learn outside your realm. And I would say two things that I would require pre-graduation is read one book of poetry and read one science fiction book. And then afterwards watch the movie. But don't do the movie first. Well, maybe I take that back. Maybe sometimes it's helpful to see the movie and then to read the nuanced book. 2001: A Space Odyssey, the book, if you read it after the film, which is how the sequence I did, because I was young. I think I was 9 years old when it came out. You really want to think about how the story nuances get played out in the book form, which sometimes in a cinematic version, you can't, you get the emotional gravity of it, but sometimes the nuanced engineering piece of it shows up. And a lot of science fiction writers are really, really good on the engineering. And so I would say to really get ready for the future, don't make any assumptions that you know what you're doing, because the rules will change, the conditions will change, the tools will change, you will change. And our best guides are sometimes our poets and science fiction writers.
Absolutely. I think fabulous advice and a fabulous discussion. Gordon, thank you very much for doing this. It's going to be very valuable to our students, and I really appreciate it.
Well, thanks, Peter. I'm hoping to see you face to face there in Canada sometime soon.